Unlike modern maps, old maps combined geography, mythology, and theology into one representation of the world. Maps presented strange creatures, biblical events, and mysterious lands that are long forgotten. But hidden within the drawings are regions that many believe point to lost cities and a home of a race of giants. It's time to uncover the mysteries at the end of the earth. Let's continue the series about things hidden on ancient maps. You'll find the previous sessions in the playlist called Why Was History Erased? Now let's continue and do some more digging into the lands of the North. The land of the North is a general term that includes various northern territories and peoples that posed a threat to the nation of Israel throughout their history. Listen to this prophecy from Jeremiah 50:41 through 42. It says, "Behold, a people shall come from the north, and a great nation and many kings shall be raised up from the ends of the earth. They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel and shall not show mercy." Now, if you tuned in to the previous sessions, you now know that the ancients considered north to be on the bottom, not the top of maps. This is where you find the Nordic countries. They lived in the colder climates. They lived at the ends, or what some refer to as the bottom of the earth. So I'm going to show a clip from Admiral Richard Byrd. Some of you may be familiar with him, but he's going to talk about his expedition to Antarctica during the late 40s. And he shares some interesting tidbits that are very relevant for us today.
About 35 years ago, our guest tonight found out whether there was any land north of the North American continent. He made that first discovery flight, and I must say that Admiral Byrd, our guest tonight, is not only our greatest living explorer, but he's been an inspiration to countless Americans. Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Is there any unexplored land left on this earth that might appeal to adventurous young Americans?
Yes, there is. And not up around the North Pole, because it's getting crowded up there now, because they find out it's really usable, not only to live in, but militarily. To live in,
it's important
but
militarily.
But strangely enough, there's left in the world today an area as big as the United States that's never been seen by a human being. And that's beyond the pole, on the other side of the South Pole, from Middle America. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.
That's a tremendous
So
challenge.
there's a lot of adventure left down at the bottom of the world.
Now, he said there's an area that has never been seen by a human being that's beyond the pole on the other side of the South Pole. Is he talking about the entire landmass or portions of it? Because there are several things to consider. The continent of Antarctica was officially discovered in 1820. Note that I said officially. This would be over 300 years after Piri Reis created his copy of the map and shows an ice-free Antarctic coastline. So someone discovered it centuries before and mapped it out long before Byrd went there.
Admiral, an expedition to which I believe you're the advisor is now en route. What is that expedition doing?
Well, that's the icebreaker Etka, and it's a reconnaissance expedition. It's going down to the South Pole area to make certain observations and to look for some bases. They will be back in April, and they will report back, and upon the information we get from that undertaking, we will base the bigger expedition that's to follow.
Did you catch that? He was sent there to make observations and look for some bases. Well, why would there be military bases there? And then he said there would be expeditions year after year because the government had really become interested. What piqued their interest? We're going to talk about that. Let's listen to the rest of it.
Well, Admiral Byrd, I can understand, I think everybody can, the interest in the North Pole because it's so near our greatest challenger, Soviet Russia. But why this interest in the bottom of the world? Nobody living down there, is there?
No, it's pretty cold. There's only one permanent resident, that's the emperor penguin. The little ones live further north. I tell you one reason they're interested. It's by far the most valuable, important place left in the world for science. That's why the scientific groups all over the nation are really interested. But more important than that, it has to do with the future of the nation, those to come after us, or even during your lifetime, because it happens to be an untouched reservoir of natural resources.
What are the natural resources there?
Well, we've found enough of coal within 180 miles of the South Pole in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while.
Well,
that's the coal. Now, there's evidence of many other minerals. We are pretty sure there's oil. Now, that coal shows the bottom of the world. Now, by far the coldest spot in the world. Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter.
well,
It was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there.
is it any secret? Is there uranium there? That would be the only thing that would be practical to actually go after, I suppose. Everything else would be economically unfeasible, wouldn't it?
Well, as we recklessly expend our resources, the time will come when we'll have to go after that stuff down there.
Notice how he keeps saying there's no one living at the bottom of the world. Well, we know in times past there were people living in the far north. But let's focus on something else he said. He says it has military importance, and we'll come back to that. He also said it has lots of natural resources. He named coal, other minerals, oil, and uranium. And then he admitted that the area was once tropical. But let's not miss how he keeps alluding to its scientific importance.
Is there a great difference between the top of the world and the bottom of the world?
There is. Now, the North Pole is the center of an ocean 10,000 feet deep. The South Pole, the center of a plateau, 10,000 feet high. The North Polar Sea is surrounded by continents that are slightly frozen. The Antarctic continent is surrounded by a belt of ice, frozen seas of at least 1,200 miles thick. Now, the south is a plateau. It gets, in some places, 14,000 feet up. I've been over areas about 13,000, and it's a little bit chilly up there.
I hope you caught the part where he said it's surrounded by a belt of ice, as in the ice wall. Important point. Now, if you were looking at Greenland on the upside down map, this is what you would see. You would see Greenland, Canada, Russia, etc. at the bottom of the earth. Now, let's go back to the point he made earlier, calling for the American presence in the polar regions, particularly Antarctica. He believed that Greenland would be important to the United States in the future. He made a point that you need to hear.
The bottom of the world will be important, not only to us, but to our allies.
I was going to ask you, does it have military importance?
It has some, and as the world shrinks, it will continue to shrink with an ever-increasing acceleration, thus bringing these places closer. And in the future, I can see a time when it will be very, very important strategically.
Well, has the development of air power increased the strategic importance of places like the
very much
Palmer
so.
Peninsula, we'll say?
Very much so. Even now, if anything happened and we lost the Panama Canal, we would have to control the islands just north of Antarctica, which are part of Antarctica, and between there and Cape Horn.
So he said, if the United States lost the Panama Canal, it would have to control the islands near Greenland. Well, they can't say he didn't warn them. And now we see that the United States is trying to take control of the Panama Canal and it wants to take Greenland. But is there more to the story? Well, in 1940, the San Pedro News pilot published this: Byrd discovers new lands in Antarctic. It says Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, commanding the United States government's Antarctic expedition, said upon arriving at this extreme southern Chilean port today that his expedition had discovered lands not charted on existing maps. Let's pause and think on that. He said he discovered lands that were not on existing maps. Were they on older maps? That's the question. It goes on to say that bare earth and mountains without snow, Byrd said, were sighted during live flights over Antarctic regions. Byrd said he had learned that some regions, which the British explorer Sir Hubert Wilkins had discovered and believed to be islands, actually are part of the Antarctic mainland. Well, let's take a look at what Hubert found, and then we'll come back to this. The title of this journal article says Sir Hubert Wilkins' Discoveries in Graham Land. As reported in the Times on 21 December 1928 and confirmed by later telegrams, Hubert Wilkins, by a flight of 1,200 miles from his base at Deception Island. Now that's a name for you, Deception Island. It says his flight proved the insularity of Graham Land. It can no longer be regarded as a large-scale peninsula jutting north from the main plateau mass of Antarctica, but is in reality two large islands separated from lands farther to the south by an ice-filled channel 40 to 50 miles broad. Now, you would certainly think that he would be able to identify an island, but Byrd disagreed with him. Byrd says here that what Hubert Wilkins had discovered and believed to be islands are actually a part of the Antarctic mainland. So, if Byrd is saying that Wilkins didn't really discover islands, Byrd had to have seen new land elsewhere. So then where are the new lands that Byrd discovered, or rediscovered, I should say? Because this newspaper article says Byrd discovered new lands in Antarctic. This goes on to say that the Byrd expedition, which reached Antarctica in January to begin surveys and observations, which may extend into several years, earlier had reported reaching and mapping the long-sought Pacific coast of Antarctica. Not only that, 6 years earlier, the San Pedro News pilot also reported this in October 1934. It says Byrd holds plateau discovery important. Geographical importance was attached by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd today to the discovery of an extensive ice-covered plateau rising about 420 miles east of Little America. The find was made by a tractor party which returned to the base here last Thursday after a 3-week journey into the untraveled area. The presence of a plateau so near Little America was never suspected and, to my knowledge, never suggested, Admiral Byrd said. Well, let's look at some information from the National Library of Russia about Thule or Thule. It says Thule is a legendary island in the North Europe described by the ancient Greek explorer Pytheas in his work on the ocean. It says in the Middle Ages, Thule often was identified with Iceland, the Faroe, Shetland, or Orkney Islands, the Hebrides. Sometimes it was even regarded as part of Britain, Scandinavia, and Jutland. However, some of the ancient authors expressed doubts about the existence of this island. Now let's look at an enlarged version of a map from 1570. It's a map of Scandinavia. And I know it's hard to overlook the merman sitting right there plain as day. But what do you see right below Greenland? You see Thule as a separate island. What did Admiral Byrd say? Let's listen to it again.
The bottom of the world will be important, not only to us, but to our allies.
I was going to ask you, does it have military importance?
It has some, and as the world shrinks, it will continue to shrink with an ever-increasing acceleration, thus bringing these places closer. And in the future, I can see a time when it will be very, very important strategically.
Well, has the development of air power increased the strategic importance of places like the
very much
Palma
so.
Peninsula, we'll say?
Very much so. Even now, if anything happened and we lost the Panama Canal, we would have to control the islands just north of Antarctica, which are part of Antarctica, and between there and Cape Horn.
So is it a coincidence then that Trump is now trying to take Greenland and regain control of the Panama Canal? Now, there are some who claim that Byrd had a diary that was later discovered and that it included information about there being an opening in the pole that led into a hollow earth, and there was an inner sun there. Supposedly, Byrd found hidden Nazi bases also, and he had encounters with strange beings, and that he saw UFOs. Now, of course, there are believers and doubters on both sides. But what's interesting is that Byrd made his final expedition to Antarctica in 1955, 2 years before his death. Shortly after this interview that we just saw, he died in 1957. The next year, NASA was founded in 1958. Then the following year, the Antarctica Treaty was established in 1959. Is it all a coincidence? Well, what we know is that there were a lot of strange sightings involving UFOs after World War II that are yet to be explained. Now, in 1946, just a year after the end of World War II, this U.S. Admiral, Byrd, embarked on one of history's most mysterious expeditions called Operation High Jump. For this expedition, he took nearly 5,000 soldiers. He took 13 ships and 33 aircrafts, and they went deep into Antarctica. Officially, the mission's goals included setting up research bases, but remember, he said they were going to see if bases were already there. They also planned to map out the polar regions and train for operations in sub-zero temperatures. But it is said that the expedition was shrouded in secrecy. There was a particular rumor going around about hidden Nazi bases that just happened to be where? In Antarctica. And there were sightings of strange flying objects during the war. So the question is, what was the true purpose for his mission? What we know is that Operation High Jump was one of the largest Antarctic expeditions ever carried out. Now again, he took almost 5,000 men with him. So it was the scale of the operation that fueled speculation about its true purpose. The huge military presence combined with advanced technology would make you think that they thought they would encounter an enemy using advanced technology. What is certain is that based on the information found on ancient maps and the words of Admiral Byrd, there were other islands at the bottom of the earth yet to be explored. So let's switch gears and read some excerpts from this book called Arctos, The Polar Myth in Science, Symbolism, and Nazi Survival, to see if we can get some additional information. I'm going to highlight portions from this section of the book that's talking about beings who arrived on Earth from outside of the galaxy and founded the first Hyperborea. Well, who would that be? Fallen angels. This is Genesis 6 right here. So it says, there has been an enormous conspiracy to conceal their origin, says Serrano. The last documents were destroyed along with the Alexandrian library. There is also a conspiracy to misrepresent them as extraterrestrials, coming in spaceships or UFOs. True, if we were to see them, they would appear as discs of light. But we have lost the senses that would enable us to perceive them properly. Their center on Earth, the first Hyperborea, was immaterial, not limited to geographic zones, and outside the circle of circles. That is the realm ruled by the demiurge, who was and is the Lord of this planet. Who are they talking about when they say demiurge? They're talking about the Most High of the Old Testament. We covered this when we did the series on Rome, but let's do a quick summary for those who are not familiar with this term, demiurge. This information comes from Bible Hub. It says, what is the role of the demiurge in creation? It says the term demiurge finds its roots in ancient Greek philosophy, particularly Plato's dialogues. The demiurge is portrayed as a craftsman-like figure who shapes the material universe out of pre-existing matter. Centuries later, Gnostic sects adapted this idea, characterizing the demiurge as a lesser, often flawed being responsible for creating the physical world. These groups held that the true supreme deity existed at a higher spiritual realm, distinct from the demiurge who fashioned the flawed material reality. Now, Marcion was one of the main ones pushing this theory. Let's look at this from Early Church History 101. This says, around the year 85, Marcion was born, the son of a bishop. So he was a Catholic. He was a Christian. He traveled around the world as a merchant and moved to Rome about 135, where he became known in the church and began to teach. Marcion observed the vast differences between the God represented in the Old Testament and the God of Jesus in the New Testament. His answer was to reject the God of the Old Testament, seeing him as the evil craftsman, demiurge, creator of an evil world. Marcion constructed a list that represents the first recorded listing of New Testament texts, basically his personal canon. He excluded the entire Old Testament and included only Paul's letters and Luke's Gospels. Marcion's influence was significant enough for his teaching to be argued against by several church fathers, including Justin, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Tertullian. It says he worked hard as an evangelist, and the Marcionite churches spread throughout the Roman world. Marcionite churches held strong until the beginning of the 4th century. Now let's go back to the book. So Serrano says, an inferior kind of godlet, this demiurge had managed to create human beings of a sort, low robotic types, of whom we find remnants in Neanderthal man. This says the demiurge's plan for his creatures was that on death they would take the way of the ancestors and return to earth again and again. For the Hyperboreans, on the other hand, this kind of involuntary reincarnation trapped in the demiurge's circles was abhorrent. Now it says these Hyperboreans, or let's just call them what they are, fallen angels, commanded the power of the vril and possessed the third eye. They did not reproduce sexually but through plasmic emanation from their own bodies, while through their veins coursed the light of the black sun. It was their great adventure to incarnate for the purpose of combating the mechanical universe of the demiurge. The book goes on to talk about a holy war, how the divine beings entered into a holy war and a second Hyperborea was made, at first invisible, later as a circular continent around the North Pole. So it says this was the place of the Golden Age. Who are they associating the Golden Age with now? Trump. But it says this was the place of the Golden Age, or Satya Yuga, ruled by Saturn, the god who devours time. Now it says generously, the Hyperboreans began training the planet's lower races. You want to take a guess as to who the lower races were? So the Hyperboreans began training the planet's lower races to help bring them out of their semi-animal state. They gave to the black, yellow, and red races a particle of immortality and began to spiritualize the earth. Then came the catastrophe. So it's talking about the flood. It says, as Genesis 6:4 puts it, the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The Hyperboreans made the mistake of mingling their blood in intercourse with the demiurge's creatures. And in this sin of racial mixture, paradise was lost. So it says the physical cause was the fall of a moon or comet, as a result of which the north and south poles changed position, and Hyperborea became invisible again. Now, before the cataclysm, some Hyperboreans had already taken refuge at the South Pole. It says others were driven southwards by the Ice Age. It says we know them historically as the fine and artistic Cro-Magnon man. So the ancestors of the Europeans to the rescue is basically what it's saying. So the sudden appearance of the Cro-Magnon man in Europe, it says, is a puzzle to anthropologists. It's a puzzle to them because they just suddenly appeared. Now the author talks about how Serrano practiced yoga and devoted a lot of his time to esoteric anatomy based on the chakras, to which he assimilates to the Nordic runes. And it talks about how this unnamed master tells him that at a certain point of yoga, one leaves one body, goes through the mystical death, past the golden sun to the black sun, and sees a new light, the green ray. Then one knows that one lives in the astral body. It says this appears to be the key to his extragalactic mythology. His Hyperboreans do not belong anywhere in the physical universe, but in a parallel state of being which they can occupy simultaneously with earthly consciousness so as to carry on their combat in two or more worlds. Listen. However, this kind of transcendence is limited to those whose blood preserves the memory of the ancient white Hyperborean race. So it says these are the same principles of the Nazis. Let's go on. It says the demiurge, who is Jehovah or Yahweh, is anything but tolerant of the meddlings of the Hyperboreans, and from the beginning he has waged merciless war on them. His main tool in this resistance is the Jewish people, an anti-race responsible for the great conspiracy to which Serrano constantly refers. Now, when it says his main tool in this resistance is the Jewish people, you would be wrong to think that he's talking about those who say they are us. And you're going to see that as we go on. There are some who know the truth. But what he's saying here is that the people of the Most High are being used as a weapon against the Hyperboreans. Serrano says these people, wrongly identifying them as those who say they are us, are responsible for the great conspiracy to which Serrano constantly refers. He says they are behind all of the institutions of this world: ecclesiastical, political, hermetic, exoteric, and esoteric. Serrano, it says, hates Christianity as he hates Freemasonry, seeing both as elements of the Ish conspiracy. It goes on to say Adolf, the wicked one we're talking about in the 1940s, he was betrayed by the aristocratic Christian and Masonic generals so as to lose the most just war of this dark age. Now, which war do you think they're talking about? So it says the only one which might have redeemed the planet, talking about Adolf, because he was breaking the circle of circles. Now let's see who they are really fighting against in this world. Listen to what William Landing, a former SS member, says here, and you'll see that he knew that they are really battling against us and not those pretending to be us. He was also a German occultist. He's the one who revived the mythology of Thule being the supposed polar homeland of the ancient Aryans. So here's what he said. He says the Thuleans, as is only to be expected, have their shadow or their nemesis. He says their rivalry goes back far into prehistoric times to an interregnum or interval during which the Nordic Atlanteans were enslaved by black magicians of Semitic origin. Were they magicians? No. But they attributed the power that the Most High had given to Israel to magic. But do you see how they described the Israelites? Black magicians of Semitic origin. So Landing points to other sources that talked about the enslavement of the Boreal race by the blacks. Now, he says the Israelites had a tendency to migrate to places north and west of Israel, and it embodied a time of nostalgia, a folk memory of this time of their dominance, and a desire to once more rule from the north. Do you think these folks know who we are? Absolutely. It goes on to say that the atmosphere becomes more occult as Gutman reveals the nature of the battle between Israel and Thule. And just think about it, family. They know what happened when Israel was told to go into the promised land and wipe them out. They remembered how our ancestors prevailed against them. They remember what happened when the Philistine tried to take the ark. Things didn't go well for them, and they were forced to return it. And this is what they're talking about when it says their rivalry goes way back. Wouldn't they know what their rivals looked like? Of course. It goes on to say that the Ark of the Covenant apparently was and is an astral accumulator designed for magical operations. It says the Hebrew magicians steal and conceal the force field of the Aryans. Just pause and think on that. In other words, they know they have no protection when the Most High is fighting for us against them. It goes on to say they capture in their Ark of the Covenant the fertilizing elements of the Aryan tradition, whose bearers were the original races of the Arctic North and the Atlantean North, with their later mixed variations, and filter the energy streams of the Aryan mission through the Hebraic pole, so as to pervert it and make it work for them. So they are attributing the victories of Israel to magic. But we know that it was the work of the Most High. Now listen to this. It says the same ark or the same type is used by the American Shriners, whose headquarters is in Chicago, and they control all the Masonic lodges devoted to the one world government. Roosevelt and Churchill belong to this brotherhood. So we know, family, that the United States and Britain are working together against us. That's why they created the fake state, to fool the masses. But before all of this is said and done, our identity will have to be revealed, because their ascended masters are still carrying a grudge. They blame us for their destruction, and they want revenge. And this is why we need our warrior and king. We have to know who he is and come out of these pagan religions. Just stop and think about it. We were forced to accept religion during the Arab and European slave trades. In other words, it was a submission to their deity. We surrendered our authority and power. So first things first, we have to get back into alignment with truth. We need to align ourselves with the Most High, the God of the Old Testament that they hate. We need to come into alignment with His Word. Yah sent His Word to heal us and deliver us from destruction. He sends His salvation. He sends a deliverer, our Messiah. And we're not going to win any battles without Him. We need to understand that. So we will end it there and pick up here next time. Be sure to hit the like button and share it. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Join me next time.